afternoon. Welcome to this first of our addresses and seminars in a series which is rational beliefs. And this afternoon we're going to look at the first of these subjects. Beginning at the beginning, we're going to look at creation, and that creation explains life on earth. So that's been set before us as the belief that we're going to examine to see if it is rational. So, just thinking about that, when I was beginning to look at this subject, I thought, well, okay, so what do we mean by a rational belief? What do we mean by this? What's our definition for what a rational belief is? Because that's going to be the test, isn't it? This afternoon, yeah? Mm-hmm. So, what do you think a rational belief is? What do we mean? Yes?
Beliefs that can be justified.
Beliefs that can be justified, yeah?
Consistent with the evidence.
Consistent with the evidence, yeah?
Logical.
Logical, yeah? Because you see, some people say there's no such thing as a rational belief. Right? They say that because they agree with you on what rational means. But they then turn around and they say that a belief is an acceptance of something, which is a definition just looked up and confirmed, an acceptance of something which exists or is true, especially one without proof. So how are we going to handle that this afternoon?
Well, it's not what it says in Hebrews, is it?
No, it's not what it says in Hebrew. So we'll get to that point and we'll do it. But it's just to sort of set the framework, because it does go on to say that another definition of it is trust, faith, or confidence that something or someone or something that someone says is it is true. So it is that. So it's a kind of like saying, like in law, there's a test in English law when you're before the judge, and I'm sure you've not been up before the judge, but the test is it reasonable? And one of the definitions that I found for rational was to be based on in accordance with reason or logic. So we're going to look at this, we're going to examine whether the belief that creation explains life on earth is justified by logic, reason, and whether there, as on the context of belief, that we're looking at faith. Our acceptance of and being convinced by the evidence, as Paul says. The evidence. So, how to go ahead about that? Well, I guess really what we're really looking at is Earth sitting there, and it's obviously abundant with life. And we've got to look at this and ask the question, is creation responsible for this, or was it just chance? So, best way to round this? Well, I thought that it might be best to look at this. So we say that one view is creation, that God, through creation, put life on earth. That's the belief we're going to test. But there is an alternative view, which is put by a lot of people, and you will me, is that there is no God, chance, natural processes put life on earth. So, we need to really uncover what the truth of the matter is here, don't we? So, let's have a look at this. Let's consider this one first and see whether there's any evidence for that. And once we've looked at that, we can then concentrate on the main part of that subject, which is looking at the evidence for creation, explaining why we have life on earth. So, what is the case made for this? Well, we'll mostly know it's evolution, don't we? We know this case as evolution, and it is something which is kind of talked about. It used to be called very much more, what was it called?
The
The theory of evolution. What happens? What's the difference between when you say it's a theory of evolution and when you say it's evolution?
Can't
They
be
were
proved.
proving it.
Sorry?
Can't be proved.
Can't be proved. The theory is something like a discussion.
It's an idea.
It's an idea that we're looking at, and when we take out the word theory and we're just dealing with evolution, it's kind of like assuming that it's been proven. Okay, so we'll look at a couple of sort of quotations for regarding this idea of chance, and there's someone here who maybe a few people in the room would recognise.
I used to go to school with him.
You did. Einstein, yeah. And the reason there's the dice there is that he famously is quoted as saying that God doesn't play dice with the universe. See, Einstein, he believed in God. He didn't think that there was just pure chance that things happened. He believed there was structure to things, the way in which things are. And so let's look to see whether this whole idea of chance has got any foundation that we can look at. And the one here, I don't know if we can read this, is anyone heard of Richard Dawkins? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So, a lot of fans in the room, I can see. So, is that okay? Can anyone read that from there, or is it too small? No, back with you can.
Yeah. Evolution itself means that species are descended from other species that are different from themselves. So we are descended from something like an ape, and before that from some kind of small mammal. Before that from a reptile, before that from a fish, and so on, back to the earliest of our ancestors, which would have been something like bacteria.
It's all a bit vague, isn't it?
I'm interested in how he's going through the entire animal kingdom.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Because even the theory of evolution, it wouldn't jump around like that.
No, it's sort of skipped across, hasn't it? The
Try
tree
it,
that.
I'll try being.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
interested that he's testing that.
It doesn't seem to really be very logical in what we're saying. He's probably sort of poking a little bit at this idea of natural selection, which is the non-random survival of randomly varying hereditary characteristics.
Yes.
Bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah, so things spontaneously happen and quite randomly, and some of them are inherited. So, how did it all start, if that's the case? That doesn't really get answered, does it, by natural selection? Because even as this first point here said is that it's descended from other species, so there's got to be a beginning. Yeah? And so from Miracle of Life by Hangroff, 4.5 billion years ago, the young planet Earth was almost completely engulfed in a shallow primordial seas. Powerful winds gathered random molecules from the atmosphere, and some were deposited in the seas. Tides and currents swept the molecules together, and somewhere in this ancient ocean, the miracle of life began.
Oh, good.
I don't want to be sceptical, but that doesn't look like good science.
Well, if you put the test you suggested on it earlier,
Yeah.
we know today that to get molecules to combine requires enormous power and energy,
It does. Yeah.
rather than a bit of a storm in the sea.
Yeah, because that's otherwise just a bit of a storm in a teacup. So there's not much chance of that happening. And in fact, this brings us into a matter of probability, doesn't it? There's a question of probability about this, and what is the property? What we're looking at here is something we've got akin to spontaneous generation. There used to be a theory of spontaneous generation, which was if you had a barn full of grain, mice would appear. And they evolved, they could sort of like popped out of nowhere to have it. Before they understood that caterpillars turn into chrysalids and then come out as butterflies, they thought butterflies just popped out of thin air. And there was a very, very poor thing. So spontaneous generation refers to the obsolete body of thought on the ordinary formation of living organisms without descent from similar organisms. A theory of spontaneous generation held that living creatures could arise from non-living matter and that such processes were commonplace and regular, according to Wikipedia.
Have they not tried this? Presumably scientists, thinking about sort of testing theories, wouldn't a scientist have tried to create life in a lab?
They have, yes.
I haven't heard.
And they produced some goo, but nothing that was actually living. They were trying to produce some amino acids, but the experiments were done back in the 50s, I believe, with electric sparks being left for days within this, what they believed to be a primordial soup. So it's lightning strikes, which is what Paul was saying, a great deal of energy to make it happen. And what they got was some amino acids sort of being formed, molecules combining, but they got left and right-handed ones. And when you get into the chemistry of it, I'm not a chemist, but when you get into the chemistry of it, left and right-handed ones to go kind of cancel one another out, and therefore nothing really much happens. So out of this, as you said, it's never been observed to occur naturally, coming back to your point, Louise. So it hasn't been observed to happen, and it's never been achieved in experiments. This was the Miller-Fox experiments that produced the left and right-handed things back in the 50s. And the amino acids that you've got need to combine to form proteins to do anything. And they're much more complicated, proteins are. So the probability of these combining, this is where we get into some big numbers. And I don't really want to go into too much of big numbers because they kind of get a bit mind-boggling and difficult to conceptualise. But the probability of combining chemicals naturally to produce the simplest known protein in ideal conditions would be over 100 billion years. Over 100 billion years is estimated as 1 in 10 to the 67. Now, just to explain that as a scientific notation, because it takes a lot of noughts. So 110 with 67 noughts after it is a very big number. The chance of something happening, therefore, is very small. It's like a fraction. Like if you've got 1 over 2 is a half, 1 over 4, the number at the bottom bigger, but the size of the thing smaller. So the chances of it probability of it happening become more and more remote. And what we're actually looking at is that, on average, this will only occur once in every that number of attempts. Okay, which means it's a lot of attempts. I actually saw some data which said that basically that for one DNA molecule to have randomly occurred would take about 70 billion years, but they estimate the universe is only 30 billion years. So we're waiting, it will happen, but not yet. We've got to wait another 40 billion years before DNA spontaneously creates itself. Anything bigger than 1 in 10 to the 50 is considered to be impossible, therefore it is considerably impossible. Okay, so that's what we're looking at there. So, evolution as a thing of probability, the chemical, the thing we've all probably heard of, the molecule is DNA, and that is the blueprint, as it's often referred to, for life. It's a structure of only 4 chemicals that put together in many, many combinations. And as it says there, that for this to occur naturally, it'd be 1 in 10 to the 40,000. Impossible number for it to occur, really. So, as Dr. Wilder Smith says, who's a chemist, it is emphatically the case that life could not have arisen spontaneously in the primeval soup of this kind. And the reason why is that there are, to allow for DNA to actually be of any use, it must duplicate. There's no point having it just once. It would have to actually be able to duplicate itself. And here's a lovely diagram which shows that these are the bonded pairs of the DNA. So you've got the long helix within a chromosome. You've got a long helix. I think if you take out of a human cell, take one DNA and string it all out to long length, it is something like about 6.5 feet, about 1.9 meters long. It's curled up, bundled up, one chromosome. We've got 26 of them inside every single cell of our body. So there's an awful lot of stuff going on in there. Now, for this to work, it has to have an enzyme which will unzip it into two halves. The appropriate other chemicals in the soup within the cell have to join onto it. Another protein has to zip it back together to produce a copy of what was there and a copy of it here. So it splits into two. And then that happens with each of the 26 chromosomes. And then the cell is in a position that it can divide. And if it doesn't divide, there isn't such thing as life.
It's got to send them to the right end.
And it's got to send them to the right end.
Kind of one with a...
Yeah, one zips one way, one zips the other.
One's got 2 that and one's got none of that.
Yeah. And so we see here that organic evolution could account, that organic evolution could account for the complex forms of life in the past and the present has long since been abandoned by men who grasp the importance of the DNA genetic code. And Dr. Grebe was a chemist. So people that really understand, and this often happens with science, is that people say, oh, they have proven this, and they don't really know what they are, who they are, or what that is that's proved. And people assume that things are more tied down and defined than the scientists themselves actually believe. So the more you know about a subject, the more you know there is to know, and the more you realise that you don't know. And so here we've got the complexity of the simplest known type of cell is so great that it is impossible to accept that an object could have been thrown together suddenly by some kind of freakish and vastly improbable event. Such occurrences would be indistinguishable from a miracle. Michael Dayton, an evolutionist. So if he's concerned about it, what chance is there? Yeah? So what is this, or what's it like in a cell? I think it's easy to overlook the complexity of a cell. So Darwin, in his thing, assumed, when he could look at a cell, it was a blob under a microscope with a dot in the middle. Bit of jelly with a dot. He had no idea that this was all going on inside every single cell. In the nucleus, we've got the 26 chromosomes in the human cell. These things here, without the mitochondria are essential, for example, to convert sugars into energy for the cell to live. So that's got to be there. The chromosomes have got to be there. All of these other bits and pieces are there, the mechanisms. There's something like 30,000 different proteins functioning within every single cell. Vastly complicated, more complicated than general public will expect to find inside the human cell. So let's quick look at the law of physics and now there's a law I think many people would have heard of, is the second law of thermodynamics. It basically says things that start hot get cold. Energy winds down. If you spin a ball, it slows up. It loses and disperses energy. The usable energy in the universe is becoming less and less. It's sort of science. Natural systems degenerate when left to themselves. That's called entropy. They wind down. Chemical compounds break down. Stuff degrades. Wood rots. Plastic breaks. Metal rusts. On the other hand, life is like reverse entropy. It takes energy in and it becomes more. We grow. statement here from the California Berkeley, a reputable university, and Dwayne Gish, PhD, as a biochemist, says, of all the statements that have been made with respect to the theories of the origin of life, the statement that the second law of thermodynamics poses no problem for an evolution of life is the most absurd. The operation of natural processes on which the second law of thermodynamics is based is sufficient alone. Therefore, to preclude the spontaneous evolution of origin of the immense biological order required for the origin of life. Therefore, he's saying that it couldn't happen. So let's look at the other thing. The thing which our subject this afternoon is about. The creation, that creation explains origins of life. So we really go back to the Genesis record, don't we? And in the Genesis record, at the beginning, begin with the beginning, the first point that we note is that the events recorded in Genesis occurred on an earth itself. It all existed because the statement says in there, in verse 2, and the earth was without form. And here we have, someone read verses 1 and 2 of Genesis 1 for me, it's on the screen.
I don't mind.
Yeah, thank you,
In
Jane.
the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
Okay, so what we're looking at is a situation where we've got 6,000 years ago. The Genesis account says what's happened here. The waters were upon the deep. The earth was without form, it was void, it was just sitting there. We don't know what was there. We're not told about it. It's irrelevant to the creation of life on earth, because at this point, the earth is void. And that's what the Bible talks about, is from then through to today. And we see then that it goes through very logical stages, and it's from the point of view of being on the surface of the earth. It's written about it. It was without form, void, and then day 1, and we go through the stages of the days, go through day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we go through the stages as the earth is layered with the necessary things to make life, the world, a habitable place for us and for God to lay out his plan. Now, the Bible is not a scientific text. It makes no claim to be a scientific textbook, because it's taking things, it's looking at this life on earth from God's point of view and what it means to us. And therefore, as we came back to that question we began with, which was that thing about faith. And here we have in Hebrews 11:1. I told you, Simon, we would be coming back to this. So, Simon, could you read that verse for me, please?
Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. But by it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear.
So there, what do we see there as the key message?
God's the creator.
God is the creator, yes.
And it's based on evidence.
It is evidence. It's that we might not see the processes, but it is the evidence. Faith provides us with the evidence. And it also tells us here that the worlds were framed by it, made, formed by the word of God. And when we read through the Genesis account, we see how in the Genesis account God spoke and it happened. So that's what we're seeing here. And this is being written in Hebrews. This is the New Testament time. We're not dealing with something which is an ancient text. People that throw sometimes say, "Oh well, you know." But no. This is an explanation of how faith is important to our understanding of it. The evidence of faith, and it's twofold. the evidence of faith. We can see the evidence of faith. We can see it in the world around us. We look at that. The natural world is the evidence of the design at all levels. The design which mankind can wonder at. The staggering beauty of things. The order that is in there. And it's clearly a higher intelligence than the human mind that is responsible for this. Because, when you start looking in detail at something that's natural, it gets to be more and more detailed. The closer you get to it, the more you magnify something under a microscope, the more detail there is to be found. It doesn't get there just like a blank, this is sort of fuzzy. If you take a man-made object, when you look at it, it just gets more and more nasty the closer you get to it. But when you look at a natural thing, it gets more and more beauty because it is designed all the way down to the lowest level. And of course, the other thing is the Bible. The Bible itself is the evidence. It talks about things that will happen, they happen. Prophecy is a fantastic example of the evidence of the truth of the Word of God revealed to us in the Bible. It shows that He is responsible for it. And we can see as we go through and we read the passage, we will see that there is further evidence of that. So let's just look on further in the case for God as creator, the biblical record. As we saw there, it began that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and God said, "Let there be light." It's frightening. And there was light. God saw that the light, that it was good. God divided the light from the darkness. He called the light day and the darkness night. He's framing our world for us. And the evening and the morning were the first day. So the biblical record is showing how God created our environment for us. Next, we see God as the creator declared throughout the Bible. So Psalm 90 verse 2, someone to read that? In the middle row? Somebody in the middle row?
I'll do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Before the mountains were brought forth, wherever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God.
So there the psalmist is declaring, isn't it? The psalmist is declaring that God is the creator. You see this thread running through the text of the Bible, that He is, and it also addresses the timeline, doesn't it? He formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. So He pre-existed the formation of the earth. So another look at something, number 3, God's confirmation that the Creator is the Creator by the prophets. Someone like to read this one from Isaiah 45, verses 11 and 12.
Yeah, I'll read that. Thus said the Lord, I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, in my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their host have I commanded.
So what extra piece of evidence do we get here?
The heavens as well.
The heavens as well.
It's just one creator of everything.
It's one creator of everything. That's exactly it, yes. Yes.
But it's quite poetic language there as well, isn't it?
So,
It was quite poetic language.
yes. Yes, it was very poetic.
It's like this one.
Yeah, so I mean, if we go back,
It's not sort of scientific, it's still got to do with creator.
but it's not wrong. It's not.
Yeah.
It's still. It's consistent. It's truthful. There's a great consistency in the descriptions that we find as we go through this record. And so let's see. We've looked at the Old Testament. The Old Testament's had to say. We've picked up from Hebrews as well. But let's just see what Jesus said. Did Jesus believe the Genesis record? Someone like to read what's recorded in Mark's Gospel, chapter 10, verse 5.
Yeah. And Jesus answered and said unto them that from the beginning of creation God made them male and female.
So now we've seen the descriptions of things which have been made around, and now we've got the essential thing about the question that that so many people ask, isn't it? Where did we come from? How much money has been spent in the world trying to find this out? And there it was, sitting there in front of you. Ready to know, ready to read it. It was there declared by God that he made us male and female in the beginning, which is as recorded in Genesis. So we see Jesus endorsed in Genesis, don't we? Number 5. Jesus sent the apostles out, didn't he? The apostle means sent out one. So he sent them out into the world. And here we read in Acts of the Apostles, in chapter 17. Would someone read for me this one from verses 24 to 26?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, and has made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on all the face of the earth.
That's interesting, isn't it? What does that add? What new fact do we get out of that?
It's the same for all nations.
The DNA is the same for all nations. We're all of one people. We're all
One blood.
one blood.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? One
Yeah.
blood.
Yeah. Because people used to, before DNA was identified as the mechanism, we talked about bloodlines, wouldn't we? And certainly in farming, it was very important, wasn't it, about selectively breeding to get the kind of farm animals you wanted, the characteristics you wanted. That was there. And we see here, we're all of one blood. All nations, all men that dwell across the face of the earth. So we're all equal in God's eyes from that perspective. Further, what Jesus reveals to us. Reveals this in the Revelations at the ends of our Bible. So we've looked right at the beginning in Genesis, we're looking to the end. And this is from the ESV and Revelations chapter 4, verse 11. Where the cry goes out, "Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honour and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." So this is in the end of the Bible, there is the link right the way back to what happened in the first book of the Bible, which is recorded there in the second book. In the last
that
book.
tells us also that God sustains everything. He didn't just create it; He keeps it alive.
Yes, and which is the reason he keeps it alive is this is the purpose of creation, and that's something which is if you take the evolutionary, the chance one, where there's no purpose, is there? Because it was about, we had the quote there about the spontaneous creation, which was that random events brought about these things. Well, there's no randomness about this, is there? No. What is the purpose described there? Give God glory and honour and power. So God has created us to give glory to himself. That is our purpose and the purpose of creation. So, just to bring things really around, I think 7 was a good idea, a good number to have, a number of completeness. The world of science is a constant sort of wonder. We saw that the nature was, that we also see there, as science continues, it reveals more of this glory. So the science has revealed the way in which we grow, the embryo grows, as it looks at the detailed processes that are going on. It discovered DNA and showed the complexity within the cell. It revealed these things, showed us that it was even more unlikely. The probability was stacking against it for it being a random event, life. And if we were to put under the microscope evolution, it has one particular flaw, doesn't it? Is that no one has ever found an organism that has never had a parent of some sort. You know, that was that, we looked at that quotation about, from Dawkins, talking about this, that sequence, which wasn't very much of a sequence, was it?
Start as bacteria.
Yeah, we'll start bacteria. Where did bacteria come from? It didn't cover that. So there's never been an organism which didn't have a parent. When we get in to look at the organisations, there's so many things you look at, you'll see that it talks about the wonderful, unique thing that we as human beings have that sets us apart from any other of the mammals is their brains. It's large, it's complex, and I find these numbers quite staggering. Billions of cells and trillions of connections between those cells, because nerve cells have got multiple connections from them. And every cubic inch of brain matter has got 100 million nerve cells interconnected by 10,000 miles of fibres. 1 inch cube. 10,000 miles of fibres interconnecting those cells. Phenomenal. When we come to this, the DNA, as I said, I mentioned this, I got the number wrong, it wasn't 1.9, it's 1.82, which is around about 6 foot, isn't it? It's less than a trillionth of an inch thick. And the amount of information it contains, this is something actually, I meant to mention before about DNA, what the purpose of DNA is. It's to carry information. Each strand of DNA carries information. One strand equivalent to 1,000 books of 500 pages. Now think about it. You've seen a ream of paper. Yeah, that's got 500 sheets of paper, isn't it? Imagine a book like that. Imagine 1,000 reams of paper stacked up with information written all over it. One strand of DNA. One strand of DNA. 26 chromosomes. There's 26 of those inside every single human cell. Amazing. How much? So the purpose of DNA is to convey information. If it randomly came together, what's the information it's carrying? Random. But this is organised. If in fact it carries information, shows that there was some intelligence to put the information into the DNA. And that's what makes it so fascinating. But what it means is that it is beyond belief that this could have been a random event. And therefore, what we've been looking at is the truth of the matter. And so the conclusion we draw is this. We've got two worldviews of how this, we looked at it before, we had the two different views, one with no God, one with God. First one, chance has, for chance to be the way in which life occurred on Earth, is that chance has beaten the impossible odds somehow. Out of random molecules came together and spontaneously formed both complex chains capable of conveying detailed information with a means to self-duplicate that information. Now, think back to what we said about what was rational meant. It was logical, and the evidence backed it up. Does that look like it's logical? The alternative is that God, the supreme intelligence, created life on Earth by design and for a purpose. And therefore, we have hope. So I'll leave you with a final thought. The court of law a case is considered to be proven when a reasonable person might accept the evidence put before them. Are you reasonable people? It is therefore reasonable to say that you would be rational to believe that creation explains life on earth. Huh?
Is it a double negative?
It is therefore reasonable to say that you would be rational to believe that creation explains life on earth. See what? Rational people. We said there was rational people in the room. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.